Hey, this is Brant Menswar, and you are listening to Your Superior Self.
Brant, my man, what's up? How are you?
I am doing well, brother. It has been a crazy couple of weeks, but good nonetheless.
Yeah, I got that new book coming out. Black
People think,
Sheep, right?
yeah, people think the hard part is writing. It's not. It's promoting.
I can attest to that. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
marketing is not easy, especially when you want to get it out and it's
It's true.
new and but you've had a successful book, right? Like your
Sure.
first one.
Yes. Yes.
So you're kind of familiar with the system and how it works, and the amount of time you got to put into it, and it's not easy, and you got to do a bunch of podcasts. You got to do
Yeah.
you have your own podcast
Yes.
with Jim Knight, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Thoughts that rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and you're on the speaker circuit as well, right?
Yeah. That's where I make my living is as a conference keynote speaker.
Nice.
Yeah.
But Black Sheep, right? So when I think of that, I think of like an outcast, like me. I'm a black sheep.
Sure.
So it's like
Yes.
the title throws me off a bit, but it's not about that, right? It's about core beliefs and things like that.
Yeah. So the book is called Black Sheep. And the reason that it's called Black Sheep is because I was 47 years old before somebody told me why black sheep aren't valued like the rest of the flock. And when I learned the truth, it shocked me at such a level that it started me down this path that ended up in a book. The reason that farmers don't value black sheep like the rest of the flock is because a black sheep's wool cannot be dyed. And
Mm.
so every black sheep is in effect 100% authentically original. And when I heard that, I'm like, we've demonized the black sheep for hundreds of years as outcasts, as sort of the on the side sort of things that have been pushed or excommunicated. And the truth is, what makes them what gives them not the same type of value as the rest of the flock is truly like my life's goal to be that 100% authentic original that I was created to be.
Mhm.
And so that's what this book is about. I believe we all have a flock of five black sheep values. These are five deeply held personal core values that no matter how much someone wants to try to change you or twist you into something that it's not, it simply won't be changed, just like a black sheep's wool.
That's pretty interesting. 47. You don't look 47, my man. You're looking like right
Oh,
around my age, 37. I mean, like you
oh
look good.
gosh.
You look good, my man.
Well, I appreciate it. That is, I'll be 50 coming up here soon. So for me, it is.
Jeez, where are you
It's
getting
been
that
20 years in the
step
music
music that
business.
where are you getting that water from?
You know, it is honestly so 20 years in the music business. I mean, that's where I came from, and I would expect to look ridden hard and put away wet, but
Ridden
it is
hard.
it is I can't drink. I am literally allergic to alcohol, and I think that probably saved me in more than one, in
Sure.
more than one way over the last 20 years.
Absolutely. I can attest for that.
Mm.
Um, so more about like your music career, 20 years in the music industry. Like obviously I've seen some clips of your on your website. Like you can play, right? And you
Mhm.
can sing, perform as well. Like I could tell just by your stage presence, like um you have this presence about you, like you're comfortable in front of crowds, but not a lot of people could say that. I mean, and you're also a speaker. That's where you make your money. How do you transition from music to the speaker
Yeah.
um world?
Yeah, it's that's a great question. It's the same but different in a lot of ways. So I lived sort of most of my life. I grew up in Manchester, New Hampshire, just outside of Boston, and was a highly competitive athlete growing up. And what led me to sort of the music stage was I had planned on playing professional baseball. That was my only plan. And I went to college and to play baseball, and I did, all those things were to play baseball. And then I got hurt, and so I had to pivot and couldn't play anymore. And so, sort of moving first to the music stage, it was the closest thing I could find to replicate what I felt like standing on the mound, playing ball. And so that was as close as I could figure out to get that same sort of a feeling. And you know, 20 years of playing music and doing that. And then, my son gets sick. My oldest son gets real sick. He gets cancer. And so we spent 263 straight days in the hospital. And this battle, I know he survives, but I know he's going to need some extra care and some other things. So I can't be gone for weeks or months at a time on tour. So I have to find a way to pivot again and transition. And so, I had a friend who sort of was in this world. And so I started to slowly stop touring and start to speak, first about collaboration. And we used collaboration as our sort of teaching tool to music. We'd use music to teach collaboration. And then got deep involved in the behavioral science of core values and purpose. And after a couple of years, just decided to write a book sort of about my experience of what that was like going through this with my son, and not having these things defined in my life, and how that was a detriment at that time of me making a bunch of really bad decisions. And so was able to sort of transition to the speaker stage to talk about those things, and became a conference speaker a couple of years ago. But it wasn't until 2019, I was named one of the top 10 motivational speakers in the country, next to Jack Nicklaus and Magic Johnson and Amy Cuddy and these incredible people. That my speaking career really took off is after that article came out. It sort of changed what was possible for me.
Wow. Um, so I did listen to some of your content, and your son's story is very, very powerful. Do you mind just going into that? I know you've said it a
Sure.
million times, but it is, I
Yeah.
mean, literally, it's moving. So,
Yeah. So in 2012, my son was 14 years old. My oldest, I have two boys. Um, when he was 14, his name is Theo. And Theo was playing soccer, and I happened to catch him after a soccer game, and I saw that he had all these bruises over him that didn't really align with the game that I just watched him play. And we set up an appointment with his doctor, and within a week or two, we realized that there's something wrong. So we find out that he's diagnosed with something called myelodysplastic syndrome, which is a blood cancer, that basically becomes leukemia. And so he needs a bone marrow transplant in order to survive. His brother is not a match for him, so we have to try to find an unrelated donor. And that starts us on this journey that they told us was going to be about 100 days. You spend 30 days in the hospital getting the transplant. You spend 30 days sort of going in, getting checked every day for numbers, where your blood counts are at. And then you spend another 30 days sort of coming in once a week and making sure that things are still on the right track. We got in there and he got the transplant. It went fine. We found an actual perfect match donor, an unrelated donor that was amazing that we were able to find that. The transplant went great. But then he developed something really quickly called graft versus host disease. And this is where sort of the marrow that is inserted into your body doesn't recognize the environment of which it's been placed. So it begins to attack the body. And so that the way that they treat that is they super suppress your immune system so the body won't fight back. And hopefully, within a very short period of time, the new marrow is producing enough new cells that it just takes over the body, and the body gives up and just accepts it. So that was the plan. And that's what they were doing because it was killing him. There's 4 levels of it. He had level 4 plus. And so they decide to super suppress his immune system, trying to control it. And he ends up contracting a deadly fungus because he's got no immune system in the hospital. And this fungus, called mucormycosis, is one of the most deadly funguses there is. It actually feeds off of dead cells. So every time a cell dies, it feeds the fungus. And the way that you treat it is you super boost the immune system to try to give your body a chance to fight it off. And so we had 2 things that were killing him with opposite treatments. And so the doctors called my wife and I into the parents' lounge one afternoon after being there a couple hundred days. And they looked at us and they said, "We're so sorry, but there's nothing else we can do. We don't think he's going to make it through the night. And you should probably go in and say your goodbyes and call who you need to call." And so, that is not the news that we were expecting to hear. We knew that he was in rough shape, but not quite at that level. And so what do you do in that moment when a group of doctors tells you to go say goodbye to your kid, right? So I stood up, I grabbed my wife's hand, I tried to be a man about it, and walked back to that room and grabbed his younger brother and sat on the edge of the bed, and you try to find the words to say goodbye. And hearing your child say, "I'm going to miss you, Daddy," is a something that you don't ever
Hmm.
really recover from. And so while this is happening, I have to call my family. And so I end up calling my younger brother who lives in New Hampshire, 1,500 miles away, school teacher there. And I'm like, I'm sorry, bud, but if you're going to say your goodbyes, you're going to have to do it over the phone. You're not going to have time to make it here. And so, he did. He was incredibly distraught that he had to do it. And that night, he decided he had to try to do something. And so he sat on his couch in his living room and he held up these poster boards that sort of described what was happening to Theo. My nephew's dying. We're running out of time. He's got 24 hours. This is what he has. This is what we're trying. Here are the drugs he's been on. And it's a Hail Mary, right? He's just trying to find something that he can grab onto and feel like he's helping in some way, even though he's 1,500 miles away. And, he never said a word. He simply played the song "Fix You" by Coldplay, and he played it start to finish. And when the song finished, he stopped the recording, and he uploaded it to YouTube. I was sitting on the edge of that bed all
Hmm.
night waiting for Theo to pass, and the next morning
Hmm.
he made it through the night, and my phone is ringing off the hook, and I'm trying to just be present, right? I don't want to be distracted, and so I'm trying to just spend every last second I can with him. And after a few hours, my phone has been vibrating so much it's literally hot to touch it. And so I finally grab it, I pick it, I look at it, and I see all these numbers and names of people that I don't know. I did not know that my brother had uploaded that video to YouTube, and I also didn't know that it had been viewed over 500,000 times by the time I picked up my phone.
Wow.
And so these names and numbers that were in my phone, some of them were doctors. And I had a voicemail from Dr. Cody Ennis at MD Anderson in Houston who said, "Hey, I saw this video online and I got your number. I'm one of the leading researchers on this fungus that's killing your son. And there's an alternative treatment that I don't know that you're aware of that might help you be able to treat both at the same time. Can I talk to your doctor?" And so we said, absolutely. And then I got a call from Dr. Tim Johnson from Good Morning America. And he said, you tell your doctor, anybody he wants to talk to, get me a list and I'll try to make it happen in the next 24 hours. And he did exactly that. So we made a list, talked to Dr. Anton at Dana Farber in Boston, who is the leading researcher on graft versus host disease. And we talked to a researcher at Cornell University doing some cutting edge research. And the four doctors put their heads together and came up with this crazy plan to try to save Theo's life. And it worked. And, Theo just turned 23 years old 3 weeks ago. And this before COVID was the first time he's been in a classroom since the eighth grade. And so I go back and I look at that moment, right? And we know, listen, you live for a year in a pediatric oncology ward, you
Hmm.
know that not everybody gets the fairy tale ending, right? And even though that was the case, and it's survivorship is rough. It's not like it's done and gone. You've got other repercussions you have to deal with. But for 4 or 5 years after that happened, I went to bed every night with one question in my head, which was, I wonder if he thinks I gave up on him. And it was a legitimate question. And the truth was, I hadn't defined the things that mattered most to me in my life. So in that moment, all I was a just a giant ball of feelings, and that is not exactly what you want to be using as the compass for making good decisions in that moment. And I made a whole bunch of really bad decisions, including choosing to say goodbye to my son when I should have never done that. If I would have known now, or then what I know now about the things that matter most to me, that conversation would have looked completely different, and it would have been filled with words that were intentional and not just bumbling feelings in the moment that didn't really serve anybody any goodness at all. And so, that was the sort of impetus to write this book. I don't want anyone to have to go through what I went through. I don't want them to have to wonder if there was something better they could have said or been deliberate with their intention or tried to influence the situation in a way that was positive. So, in order to do that, you've got to figure this stuff out. You've got to define these things in your life if you want to live with deliberate intention. And if you don't, then you're just stuck with winging it, and winging it is never going to get you to where you ultimately want to be.
Mm, that's just amazing. That's an amazing story. I mean,
Yeah.
just I can't even like. I don't know. I have 3 kids,
Yep.
um, and I can't even imagine even thinking about having that conversation. Like the last conversation with your boy in the hospital,
Right. Yeah.
and what you would even like. I can't even imagine what I would say to him or what I would do. Like it's just kind of like you said, you're like in this ball of emotion. Like you're just kind of reacting at that point, and you're like you said, like if you would have done it like if you knew then what you do now, like it'd be more intentional, like that's
Yeah.
that's that's huge. And I think that you putting this book out and allowing others to see that and be vulnerable with your story and just be transparent, I think it's going to help a lot of people just understand, why we need to be intentional with what we say to others, like people that we love,
Yeah.
and it's so important. Like I feel like a lot of people are just so scared to like be vulnerable and to like actually show themselves and who they really are, and like fear of rejection or
Yeah.
fear of being like exposed a little bit, right? Like I
Yeah.
don't know. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, biologically speaking, our brains are wired to view uncertainty as a threat, right? And so anything that's uncertain is a threat to our brains. And so all our brains want to do is take the uncertainty and make it certain. What our brains don't really care about is whether it's right or not right. It doesn't matter if it's true or false. It just wants to be certain. So you could be certainly wrong about something, but as long as your brain thinks you're certain, you're good, right?
Yeah.
So that coupled with decades worth of vulnerability equals weakness made it really hard, and it took people like Brene Brown to come along and talk about their strength and vulnerability and what that really looks like and how the best leaders in the world lead with vulnerability. It humanizes us in a way that only vulnerability can,
Yeah.
and it allows us to connect on a deeper level with people. And so, that is tough, especially as a alpha male. You know what I mean? I think it's really it adds another level of complexity when you come out of a culture that is just you're supposed to have the answers. You're not ever supposed to show weakness. You're not ever supposed to tell somebody that you don't know what to do next. You know what I mean? It's just something that has taken me a minute to get. I don't even want to say comfortable because I'm still not comfortable with it, but I know that I need to do it, and so you do, and it's paid off tenfold, I think, and I hope that, as you said, I hope this book inspires people and motivates people to define these things because winging it is incredibly dangerous. And most of us are winging it. If you can't tell me what your 5 or 6 personal core values are, you can't tell me that why they are. You got to give me some examples from your past as to why they are. And you got to tell me how that has factored into your purpose. If you can't do that, then you're winging it. And most people like myself who were control freaks don't ever want to admit that we're winging anything. We're being intentional. But being intentional is not acting with deliberate intention. And that's where the big difference is and why this is so important.
Well, where did you come up with the 5 core values? Like, was there like a theory that you liked that you said, all right, this is what I'm going to follow? Like, how did you come about with the five?
Well, when I started to do the research for the book, there's a ton of research out there based in some Maslow's research with
Mm-hmm.
peak experiences and the hierarchy of needs. There's some research around the 5 factor personality model that there's been a ton of white papers written on, and these are the things that things like Myers Briggs and DISC and some of these other personality assessments are based on. And when we started to get into the work of values, what we know is that it is impossible to honor more than five or six values on a daily basis with deliberate intention. It's just anything more than that becomes unmanageable. And so what we did was we created this online assessment to sort of give people this first dip into the values pool, right? Just dip your toe in. It's not, if you wanted to go down the deep well where, you would take Maslow's theory and you would talk about peak experiences and you'd talk about how you felt during those moments of your life. What was it that shaped you? That's a lot of deep dive that a lot of people don't want to get into, right? And so we said, can we make it quick? Can we give it a glimpse of what's possibly the truth, enough to get people interested enough to continue the work? And so this black sheep assessment at findyourblacksheep.com, you go on, it presents you with 125 commonly held personal core values. And the first thing it asks you to do is just quickly read these words, and any word that resonates with you, just go ahead and select it, right? So you're going to go through and you're going to see words like accountability and achievement and empathy and family. And as you're going through, you're just selecting the words that resonate with you. Well, after a couple of years of doing this and a few thousand people who've gone through this methodology, we know that the average person selects at least 30 words out of those 125. So now you're telling me that 30 things in your life are incredibly important to you. So human nature is going to say that you're going to try to honor those 30 things whenever you possibly can. You're going to inevitably fall short because it is a impossible task. And when you do fall short, you're going to beat yourself up about it. You're going to allow things like shame and depression and anxiety come into the picture because you expect perfection. And so what we do is we take the subset of words. So if you selected 30, we're going to start with those 30 now. And we're going to say, let's group these together by likeness. So things like sympathy and empathy get grouped together, and things like achievement and success get grouped together. And before you know it, you've got 5 buckets of words that are similar in likeness. And you get to pick what's the one word from each of those buckets that is your non negotiable. What is the one word you cannot live without? And that gets you to your initial flock of 5 black sheep values. That's what the online assessment does. And that's sort of your first dip in that values pool.
It's pretty, I'm sure that companies are utilizing this, correct? I mean, I would
Now,
assume
yeah,
so. I would assume
yes,
so. I mean, that's pretty
yeah,
nice.
it
What's your,
is.
what is your, what's your number one? Like what common, well, I guess not common core, but like core belief is non-negotiable for you?
So I'll tell you. So I have 6, right? So even though I say there's a flock of 5, it's very common for someone to have an extra.
Hmm.
So my 6 are creativity, hope, impact, empathy, family, and authenticity. Those 6 things are what I filter every decision in my life through. And the first question that I ask is, does it honor or does it violate what these non-negotiables are for me? So if I'm making a decision, it's either going to honor it or it's going to violate it, and that's where that conversation starts. Um, Once I get beyond that, then I have to look at gathering all the information I possibly can get my hands on to make a decision. And then I have to honor what I'm feeling in that moment. And if I do those 3 things, then I've made a good decision regardless of the outcome. And that was part of what this book teaches you, is that, look, I'm a grade A control freak of like the highest caliber, man. Like if you, Trey, if you invited me to dinner, I would say yes, and then I would drive your car. That is the level of control that I demand
Well,
in
you
my
said you
life.
missed the mound. I'm assuming you were a pitcher, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
there you go. You're a control freak
that's
for
right.
sure.
That's it. And so for me, the hardest part of this process was admitting that I don't control outcomes.
Hmm.
And that took me diving into the science that humans don't control outcomes. We only control the deliberate intention that goes in to making decisions. But unless your name is Gandalf or Glinda, you just don't have that kind of power. You don't control outcomes.
Sure.
So that was really tough for me to accept. But when I did, then I started to see that, when I ask the question, how do you know when you made a good decision? And I've asked this to tens of thousands of people in the last 18 months. I get the same answer every time. And it's always based on a result or an outcome. Well, that's something called outcome bias. There's an entire scientific study around outcome bias of how we cannot determine whether a decision was good or bad based on an outcome after the fact. And so a good decision has nothing to do with an outcome. Neither does a bad decision. The decision, whether it's good or bad, comes from honoring having something that is born from these black sheep values that you considers every fact you can get your hands on and honors what you're feeling in the moment. If you've done those three things, you've made a good decision regardless of the outcome. Period. And when you shift your focus to that, then you take your happiness off of the back of an outcome or a result. And all of a sudden, you find yourself in much better control of your life, being able to go to bed and sleep at night, knowing that you've made these great decisions and stop worrying about outcomes that are out of your control.
I love that. I love that 100%. I think, can you come up with some type of algorithm that you can kind of like see your future self and you can kind of see what to avoid and what to go after? Because like, I feel like I'm in that boat where, the decisions that I make, it's like, obviously I do it a lot of a feeling too, like frequency,
Yep.
like vibration. How am I
Yep.
aligned to it? That's how I know whether or not I am, making a right decision. But it's like, I was just thinking about this today, like, when you get lost off your path, right? Like you're
Yeah.
pursuing something,
Yep.
your dreams are your dreams. There's no one else that are, well, maybe there's probably a lot of other people that have the same dreams, but there's no pathway that is right. Other people's paths are their paths, not yours. So a
Yeah.
lot of time you lose track of where you're at and you don't really
Yep.
know where you're at. So like when you go from, Delaware to California, on a map where you're at and how
Yeah.
you can estimate about what time you're going to get there, when you're going to get there. But when you're going after your dreams, there's no map. There's no like really idea. That you're going, tomorrow I'm going to take the next step
Yep.
and I'm going to try to gauge today's outcomes. But
Yep.
there's no really anything to judge or guide me as far as, how far I've come.
Yeah.
And the only thing, and I've been meditating on this all day today. It's like, as long as you're following the thing that what it is, like as
Mm-hmm.
long as you're still feeling the love and the frequency towards that,
Mm-hmm.
like that's your North Star. Like that's, you keep following that until your North Star and your dreams align, until your dreams are in front of you. Like that's the only thing. And like I meditated on all day and it was just like, man,
Yeah.
it just, you're never ever going to know. And it's the journey too. It's like the journey is half the fun. It's all the fun, really. It's like
Sure.
looking back after you reached your dreams and saying, man, I remember 2 years ago, like I totally didn't know where I was going with this, but then the
Right.
universe kind of presented me something, and then I took that that left hand turn, and I ended up here, and it's like, man, what was I scared about? Like, what was I doing? Like, why was I so worried? Like, and
Yeah.
that's a lot of people that I talk to. It's like, how do you know where you're at? And there's no compass other than the thing that you're doing. Like, always pursue that. Like, that's your true north. That's your North Star. You're never going to have a map that says, all right, 2 more years, man, you're going to be good. You
Right.
just keep working. And if you really love it and enjoy it,
Yeah.
like that vibration, that frequency is
Yep.
never going to die,
Yep.
but you're always going to be doing that thing that lights you up.
So there's a couple of things for that I think. So, I'm with you. I go to bed every night to 417 hertz, right? And that's how I sleep. Literally is listening to 417 hertz on a
I don't
nightly
think a lot of people
basis.
know what that is. Explain that.
There are certain frequencies that our bodies resonate with, and coming from the music world, there are certain there's a reason why people enjoy certain songs, and it's because some of those songs are within a certain hertz range, which is the tonal range that you're listening to, and it's sort of been centered around these studies of our bodies reacting to certain frequencies. So on one side, you've got something like 417 hertz, which has been shown to really aid in the sleep process because it
Mhm.
lets your mind rest and your body rest. And all the way down to the comical side of the mythical brown note, which is the deepest bass that basically makes you relieve yourself
The
if it's
brown note.
if it's played right. And so you got to be careful for that brown note. But what I would tell you is this: I agree exactly with what you're saying. The question that I always ask people in that pursuit is, how do you know what you're chasing is yours?
Mm,
And that's the question, because this is what I have discovered in this work. You're going to, let's say you take the assessment. You take the assessment, you've got your introductory flock of five values that you go, okay, this is it. I know these are my black sheep values. This is what it is. Well, the next part of the process is to prove that indeed these are your values. Because what we know now, by looking at the research, is that in that initial flock of five, there are two or three values that are without a doubt 100% authentically real. And you can give me dozens of examples over the course of your life as to how they've shown up and why they have become these immovable, non negotiable values for you. But I also know that two or three of what you selected is complete fabricated bullshit. And it is either who you want to be or who somebody told you you should be, but they are indeed not your sheep. And that doesn't come out until you start to track them and you find zero evidence of them in your life on a daily basis.
Mm.
And that's because you're caring for someone else's sheep. And so this process of tracking allows you to discover which are yours, which are not yours. And listen, some of us are just, we've been conditioned. Let's say you grew up your whole life having to care for siblings or care for an elderly grandparent or mother or father. You are conditioned to care for other people's sheep. And so it takes a minute to separate out which ones are yours and which ones aren't. And when you start to discover that there is zero proof for some of these that you are claiming as your own, it's why you have these feelings of not enough. It's why you have these feelings of not necessarily liking yourself all that much. And it's because you are claiming something to be yours that is actually not yours. And you have to do the work to figure out where your lost black sheep actually are. And that just takes some time to figure out where they are, why they've walked away, and what you need to do to get them back.
Mm. And I gotta listen to you, man. I mean, you've had some major dreams as far as um, baseball,
Mm-hmm.
music, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now you're, internationally known speaker. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you've had some dreams, brother. So like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like baseball, right? Like that's
Yeah.
every little boy's dream is to play baseball. It was
It's true.
mine. Like I didn't have like I was like, I was like big Cal Ripken fan. I was like, I'm
Yeah.
playing shortstop, dude. Like I'm not going
Yeah.
to college. And then that
Yes.
obviously never happened.
Yes.
But it's like make sure it's your own. Like I that is so hard to do, because
It
you said
is.
we're preconditioned. Like we are
And
conditioned. Like a lot of our belief systems, like you think about it, you're born,
yep.
you're raised by your parents
Yep.
who are basically projecting their beliefs on you.
Mm-hmm.
You're raised in a society that does the same. You go to a school that does the same.
Mm-hmm.
They're all teaching you how to be factory workers, essentially.
Yep.
That's another episode by itself. But at the end of the day, your belief systems have been heavily influenced by the people that you surround yourself by. That is called
Mm-hmm.
programming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to weed through all that and have a tool like your website is very important to be able to one realize something that you may not have realized before, like some of these words that you can kind of help guide you through the process of finding the thing that is yours, like finding your dream, right? By
Mm-hmm.
word association, by finding your core beliefs, by finding your sheep.
Yep.
And then what do they do when they define their sheep? Do you have like some type of program or system that they can put in place to help guide them along the way?
Yeah. Yeah. See, so that's the big shift, right? So it's one thing to know and discover what your black sheep values are, but knowing what they are is never going to bring you the transformation that you seek, right? And so you have to learn to speak them into existence. And I'm not a manifestation guy. I get turned off a lot by the people claiming their Lamborghinis and their, this, that, and the other thing. That is not my cup of tea. But I do believe in practical manifestation. And what I would consider practical manifestation is taking one of these values that you know is at the very fabric, it's the very core of who you are, and choosing when and where these things appear in your daily life. So, what
Mm.
happens in this process? You spend a couple of weeks tracking and proving that indeed these are your values and not someone else's. When you get to the feeling like you feel, okay, I feel pretty good about this, that these are mine. Well, then you're going to actually program them into your day. You're going to speak them into existence. You're going to look at your calendar. You're going to look at your appointment schedule every day. And you're going to go, okay, at 10 o'clock, I've got to meet with John. Which one of my black sheep, one or more, need to show up in that meeting to maximize the impact of that meeting? So, does creativity need to show up? Does hope need to show up? Does empathy need to show up? What needs to show up? And so you start acting with deliberate intention. You start choosing when and where these things appear, and you don't wait for the perfect moment. You speak it into existence. You bring it up. You drive that conversation. And what ends up happening is you start to find that you're honoring those things that matter most. So when I started to do this, it was January of 2019. So I had known what my black sheep values were for the better part of half a year, but I wasn't speaking them into existence. I was waiting for moments for them to appear. And when I switched and said, "Gosh, this is what I have to do," and that came from a chance meeting with Gary V. I don't know if you know Gary V, or your listeners know Gary Vaynerchuk, but Gary is a mogul and an icon in the social media world, and Gary's all about documentation, right? Document your life. Doesn't have to be content generation so much. Just document your life and let people in. And so I happened to meet him. We had this quick conversation. Super genuine, kind man. Everything you sort of want somebody like that to be. And one of the things that I found out about him is that his life's goal is to own the New York Jets. And I am like, as a lifelong Patriots fan, that immediately made me want to throw up in my mouth. But I said, okay, so he knows, he's worth a couple hundred million, right? He owns
Yeah.
VaynerMedia.
Yeah.
He's worth a couple $100 million, but he knows that if you're going to buy an NFL franchise, you need to have a B in front of the alien to even have a prayer. So he's going to keep his nose to the grindstone, and he's going to work until he's 68 years old. He's going to make a bid. He's going to buy that team. They're going to go to 6 Super Bowls. They're going to win 4, and he's going to die. Like, he has his plan. That's what he wants to do. And so I'm like, okay, all right. I'm reading an article a couple months after I meet him, and it's in the New York Times, and it says the title of the article is "Jets Owner in Waiting Will Tailgate for Now," and it talks about him knowing that nobody in the Jets franchise knows who he is. I mean, he's a pimple. I mean, he's nobody, and so he's like, but this is going to be my team. So he sits out in the parking lot and he tailgates with his family and his friends, and he goes and watches the game just like everybody else, and he started the journalist interviewed Gary's brother named AJ. And the journalist said, AJ, man, I got to tell you, it's a little bit weird talking to Gary because he sort of talks about this stuff like it's just going to happen. And his brother said, yeah, he's going to speak it into existence. And when I read that, I went, that's the missing piece for me. I have to actually speak these values into existence. And so in January of 2019, I literally started every day. My day started by looking at my calendar, and you would see an appointment, a date, a time, a person's name, and then you'd see 3 or 4 values written next to it, or whatever needed to show up, right? And so you'd see creativity, you'd see empathy, you'd see impact, you'd see authenticity, and all these different things. By June of 2019, 6 months later, at that point in January, I was doing about 25 talks a year, right? Um, by June, I was up to I'd booked 70. So I was doing 70 talks a year. My speaking fee tripled, and I got named one of the top 10 motivational speakers in the country alongside Jack Nicklaus and Magic
Yeah.
Johnson and these incredible people, right? So I looked at that. When that happened, I can't even begin to tell you the level of imposter syndrome that I felt, because these are heroes. I'm like, these are some of the people I've grown up my whole
Yeah.
life
Yeah.
watching. And I'm going, what the hell am I doing in this conversation?
Yeah.
And it's taken me the better part of a year, Trey, to figure out the truth. And the truth is, and this is both, it should be incredibly sad and incredibly exciting. And that is the fact that because I've determined what these things are in my life, because I've chosen a purpose in alignment with these values, I am living my life on purpose. I am speaking them into existence. And that, my friend, is just as rare as Jack Nicklaus winning 18 majors. It's just as rare as Magic Johnson having a Hall of Fame career, as Amy Cuddy doing her amazing work at Harvard. It literally is that rare. And that should both be incredibly sad and incredibly exciting that that's what's possible if you just decide to define these things in your life and start living your life on purpose. Who knows what's really out there? I read in my research, I always do a little bit of research. In my research of you,
Oh God, here we go.
what I found out, and what this I love this. I love this when I read this, is that you decided basically to stop winging it in your life because you believed there was something more out there for you. And that, my friend, is what people have to feel if they're going to chase after whatever's out there. And all I'm trying to do is take people who decide and believe that there is something more for them out there, give them a path to actually get there. And that is what excites me the most, and why I'm so happy to be with you on this podcast, because that's what it's going to take for us to see the type of change we want to see in the world, is people deciding that they can't settle for winging it and just having the life they have. There is something more for them out there.
Mm, beautifully said, man. For sure, you definitely belong on that list, dude. Speaking it into existence, like I totally believe that. Like what you were talking about earlier, like the law of attraction, like a Lamborghini. Like I'm not into that. Like, but I think that you can definitely, like, Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about epigenetics, and the epigenetics is the unconscious consciousness in your cells with,
Mm-hmm.
like, at a quantum level, being able to attract energy. We're magnets. I think, like what you're talking about, like and I listen to a lot of Jim Carrey too. He talks about it like you have to believe that it's already here. Like you have to talk about it like it's here. Like he wrote that $10 million check
Check to himself. Yeah,
to
yeah.
himself, and then he got it when he got Dumb and Dumber, and then like he's
Yeah.
all about it. Like he used to go drive up on some Skyline Drive and stand on this like ledge overlooking LA and hold his hands out and like imagine the universe like raining gifts on top of him, and just getting, basically putting it out to the universe and saying it is mine, it is mine, it is mine. And then next thing you know, and he's like, I'm living proof of that. So, like, I
Mm-hmm.
definitely believe that.
Yeah.
I definitely I'm starting to see it work differently in my life, because it's like it gives you this sort, like, it somehow the physics of it and some of the psychology of it like tricks your mind into already believing that you have it.
Mm-hmm.
So like some weird, quantum physics equation usually works out and ends up bringing it into your life. I mean, there's definitely examples where, we're all creators of our reality, like all of, I mean, obviously we are creating a reality right now, but you can also change it. You can also change it the
Mm-hmm.
way that you want. And there's a lot of people that are examples of that. And then, like, to hear you talk about that, like Gary Vee, I genuinely believe that he'll be the owner of the Jets and
Yeah.
everything you talked about. Like
Yeah.
he believes it. It is here. It is his.
Yep.
And it's, I don't think a lot of people realize the true inner power that we have inside of ourselves. Like I am becoming more spiritual, mystical, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
However, like Dr. Joe Dispenza, like I'm a huge fan of his. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm all about that. And if anything, becoming more aware. You talked about Maslow.
Yeah.
Maslow was a big believer in transpersonal psychology, which is a lot of has to do with, you know, like there's just so much more out there. Like our consciousness is like the tip of the iceberg, right? Like that is our consciousness. Underneath is just this whole another universe that we do not even know, because of it's our unconscious. And I'm starting to learn more of that anyway.
Yeah.
um
Well, you're starting to see people, even the hallucinogenic treatments, to
yeah.
come back because it's, again, it unlocks a part of us that is really hard to tap into when the world tells you different, right? And so you've got everything around you telling you one thing, and it's hard to get your brain to believe what's possible. And that to me is, the interesting piece, and this is the end of the sheep story, right? Is that even though farmers don't value those black sheep like the rest of the flock, they absolutely do value them, but just not in the same way. So the way that it works is farmers keep one black sheep for every 100 white sheep in their care, and they keep them as a marker. So every morning the sheep farmer wakes up, they look out over their flock. And if they've got 500 sheep in their care, they should see 5 black sheep. And those 5 black sheep get the farmer's first look. And they get that look because they're able to stand out from the other 495 sheep that look exactly the same. If the farmer doesn't see 5 black sheep, he knows something is wrong. It's famine, it's disease, it's wolves, it's something. But if he just tried to look at the 495 sheep that look exactly the same, what is the potential number of sheep that he'll lose before he knows there's a problem? So when he sees the black sheep that might be gone, he knows immediately that he has to start to go check. And so the idea with this is when you lead with your black sheep values, you get everybody's first look. And that's how it really works. If don't you want your wife's first look, you want your kids first look, you want your employer's first look, you want your community's first look. I mean, that to me is really what it's all about. And so the way that we do that is by leading with those things that make us the extraordinary original that we are, and not trying to be like everybody else who is what I lovingly refer to as sheeple, right? There, you don't want to be what everybody else is. You got to be that unique, authentic creation that you are, but it takes a little bit of work to discover what those values are so that you can let everybody see them. And when you do, it's why people like you and me have a bit of an instant connection, is because black sheep recognize black sheep. That's how it works, right? And so it's incredibly powerful when you can unite them together, because we start to see that it's the things that make us unique that also join us together.
Ooh, man, I see what you did there with the black sheep, and that was that. You've been working on this for a long time, buddy, because
Brother, I
it
got a
works
book, brother.
very well. So talk about that. I mean, we don't have much time
Yeah.
left, but
Yeah.
you know, you're a professional speaker. I mean, you've been doing it for a couple of years. Like,
Mhm.
what was your first experience like? Like, I mean, you know, I feel like public speaking is like obviously the number one fear, but how do you get over that? How did you get better? I mean, obviously practicing, but talk about that.
So what I would tell you is that there's a couple of things. One is um, I laugh because I get treated way more like a rock star now than when I was an actual rock star. Nobody's afraid that I'm going to destroy a hotel room. They're putting you up in the 5-star resorts, and you're showing up to gift baskets, and it's a completely different life, right? But when you get on that stage, there's a couple of things that I always tell people that have aspirations of doing this. Number one is you have to own your content. And I mean, own it to the point where you could stand toe to toe with the biggest naysayer and have a logical discussion as to why you believe what you believe. And if you can't own your content, it's going to be really tough for anybody to believe anything that you say. Right. So when you own your content, you really have that inner swagger. Right. Now let's talk about that swagger, because it's the outer swagger that also has to exist. You've got to have enough swagger to carry a stage, and the bigger the stage, the bigger the swagger. If you are, when I first started off and I was speaking to groups of 30, you don't have to have that much swagger. But when you're speaking to 3,000 on a stage that is 100 feet long by 100 feet high, you have to have the swagger to carry that stage, right?
Mhm.
And that to me is something that you can learn to develop, but a lot of it is natural. You just either come into that. You come from a competitive background. You come from this area that you're comfortable in that environment. For me, when you own the content, it allows me to focus on the performance. And so what I do, I call edutainment. And you're going to get the education part of it, but I'm going to entertain you at the same time, because that's the only way I can keep your attention. And so, sort of, for me, the journey went from 30 people to 50 people to 75 to 100 to 200 to 500 to 1,000 to 3,000 plus. And so, that was like, it took a minute, or it took a couple of years to get there. But when you're there, there's a different expectation on you. If you're the keynote of a 3,000 person conference or a 5,000 person conference, there's some expectations that you're going to bring the house down, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it's going to be
yeah.
amazing. When you show up to talk to the Kiwanis Club at 7 a.m., there's not a lot of expectations on your shoulders, right? So it's a little bit different. So you got to sort of start small, make all the mistakes you're going to make, learn from them, and sort of work your way to the bigger stages.
You're right, man. Own your content. I love that because I don't think like you better freaking do your research. Like you know what I
Yeah.
mean. Like you better do your research. Know what you're going to talk about and like understand it. And I don't mean like half-ass research. I'm talking about like actually reading the scholarly
Yeah.
articles and peer review articles and actually know your shit because all it takes is like one guy who challenges you and like gets you rocks your boat a little bit and then
And
you're
all
you're
of a
done.
sudden, your credit's gone, and all of a
Yeah,
sudden, nobody believes a word you say, right? And
I
that's
know.
it's interesting, man, because there's a fine line between that level of swagger and someone's willingness to question you. Right? It's one of those things that it's a crazy thing that if you show enough swagger and you own your content, they sort of go, well, you must be right.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you leave that window open for every pocket bookworm who wants to show up and challenge you because they're an expert in this particular area. And so, for me, I know the science. I have to know the science. And if I know the science, then I feel really comfortable with the conversations because I'm never going to tell someone that this is the only way. What I'm
Yeah.
going to tell them is that this is what has worked for me. And I'm happy to show you what I did. And if I can help you in your journey, I'm all about it. But know that there is always an exception to the rule. Know that there's always some undiscovered, unreported science out there that might shine additional light on what it is that you're doing. But you got to be open to the science. You got to make sure
Yeah.
that you're basing what you're doing off of real things that can be proven because people don't want belief, they want knowledge, and knowledge requires proof.
Well, that's the best thing about science is like every theory, people, you have hypotheses and then you have theories. Hypotheses are, nothing until they're proven and are not proven, but, data supports it. And then it turns into a theory. And theories are, obviously everything they've been able to, accumulate the data and it
Yeah,
supports it. And the next thing you have is a law. A law is something that's a given, like the law of gravity, right? Like,
that's right.
but theory is awesome because you can always improve that. Like, so you're going off a
Yeah,
bunch of theories, a lot of scientific theories,
yeah.
but there's always that chance that someone's going to come in and turn it on its head. Everybody like
Mm-hmm.
the rotation of the sun. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it was a sin, a blasphemy to even back in the day to say that, oh well, the Earth rotates around the sun. Like people are like, what are you
Yeah,
talking about? No,
yeah.
it doesn't. And now it's a
Yes,
it's a law. Like it is it
that's right.
is it is what it is. But
Yep.
that's the best thing about science is that it's always building on itself. And that's as a speaker talks, that says something about you because you got to stay up on the science. You can't just,
You do.
you got to go back and review the research because there might be a paper out there that's stepping their game up a little bit and taking it to the next level, which is,
Yeah.
pretty hard.
Yeah, it's not one and done, right? You can't just like here's what I know, and all of a sudden you find out that they've disproved a theory or they have they've shined some additional light onto different areas that changes maybe the outcome or what you were focusing on. And so it's something that I have Google alerts set up for very specific words that trigger sort of these research articles and other things that I constantly, it's one of my daily routines, right? I'm looking at what shows up in my alerts. What do I have to be aware of? One of the big things for me is because Simon Sinek wrote this book, Start With Why. And I say that that's not possible. You have to start with what. I get a lot of those alerts of me saying something about an asterisk to that book. I believe you can start with why if you know your why is correct. But if your why is not correct and you attempt to start with it, you're never going to experience the transformation that you're looking for. And so that's why we have to define these values first. Out of those values, we choose a purpose and alignment. And out of that purpose, we choose how to honor it by our mission every single day. And that changes all the time. And so those three things are sort of the centerpiece of all of this work. It's values, purpose, mission.
That's why I love you so much, man. Because you're like that one guy. You're like that guy that's not you're not gonna help me find my why, my motivation. You're gonna help me find the path. You're gonna help me push me down that a little bit. And that's what
Hmm.
I need. That you know what I mean. Like a lot of people
Yeah.
need that, as opposed to a guy who's gonna fire you up and make you run through a wall. Like I just need the path, bro. Like
Yeah.
like
So it's the difference between inspiration and motivation, right? And this is
yeah,
the thing that I get really frustrated with. People confuse those two words together all the time, and they're very different. So inspiration is external. If you are being if you think you're being motivated and it's something externally, somebody's success, you're looking at somebody got a new house, somebody has this new job, they're making X amount of money. That's all inspiration. That's not motivation. Inspiration is always external. Motivation is always internal. Motivation is about behavior, is what it is. It's about what your behavior and your beliefs are inside, right? So these values are what are motivation. Anything else outside of yourself is all inspiration. And if you try to use inspiration to push you towards your goals, it's okay, but know that it's fleeting and it lasts for a blip of a moment. It's the motivation, it's these values that keep you committed toward the path that you're on to reach that destination that you've set for yourself. But if you continue to ignore those values, you're never going to stay committed to the path. And that's the hardest part. So you've got to define these things so that you've got it, it functions like a GPS, right? When you're in your car and you say, "This is where I want to go," and the minute you veer off the path, the GPS starts yelling at you. Well, wait a minute. You told us you wanted to go there. You're headed somewhere else. Do you need us to reroute you? And you're like, no, I'm taking a piss or I'm going to get a burger or whatever it is. You just veered off the path for a minute and the GPS immediately starts yelling at you. Well, what do you think your values do? That's exactly what your values do when you decide that these are my non-negotiables. Every time you veer off the path, those values go time out.
yeah.
That is not what you told us matters most. And so, do you need to reroute? Do you need to figure out something for yourself? Or do you need us to really keep you on the path that you've told us is the most important path for you to follow? And so, when people don't define it, it is way too easy to make up excuses and veer off in your own direction and ignore everything else.
Amen to that, brother.
Mm.
This has been amazing. How can people connect with you, and how can they buy your book?
If the best way is to just go to findyourblacksheep.com. From there, you're going to be able to see the book, see the testimonials. You'll be able to buy the book anywhere you want to go buy books. You can walk into Barnes and Noble or Books a Million in the States here, or any of your independent booksellers will have it as well. And you can see all my speaking engagements there. Any other questions you have, you can follow me on social media. It's just simply at Brant Menswar on all of my social media. It's Menswar. And no matter what platform you on, that's where you can find me.
It's awesome. Brant, last question, kind of
Yep.
big deal. What do you want your legacy to be?
Oh man, I really want my legacy to be that that was the guy that motivated me to discover what mattered most in my life. That's the legacy I want.
Where do you want to go though? Like where's you're a rock star now. You're on, you're getting all these gigs to speak, tripling your fees. Where do you want it to go? Like what is the dream for you?
So I would say that the path that I am on is pulling me towards those Brene Browns, those Simon Sinek's, right? So I'd love to have my own Netflix special that we talk about these things. I would love to have academies for people to go through to learn how to figure these things out. I'll continue to write books, but to be honest, I really enjoy speaking more than writing. And so I'll write what I have to write to support my speaking. But really, what I want out there is a larger platform for larger impact. And so, whatever I need to do to sort of get to those levels, what separates the Brene Browns and the Simon Sinek's from everybody else is research. They're researchers.
Yes.
So why do you think I created my own assessment? Is so that I have proprietary data that I can use to say, you don't have to believe me. I can show you the data, right? And
Yeah.
so that's why I've done it. That's why I'm collecting thousands and thousands and thousands of answers from people to be able to say, do you know what women between the ages of 31 to 40 value more than anything? Because I do. I can show them
You could
these
be
numbers. I
deadly
can
if you were
show,
like
right?
serious, like a younger single guy. Like you could be
Oh God, man.
deadly.
I'm so far
31
out
to
of that
40.
game, brother. I've been I have been married for almost as long as you've been alive. I've been married for 27 years, right?
Well, you
Which
might
in
need
rock
that.
and roll years,
You might need those algorithms when if
I'm,
anything ever happens, man.
I'm telling you what. I'm telling you what.
um, do you ever speak that you're into being? Like, do you speak it like it's already happened now, like we were talking about earlier?
A little bit, for me, it's about programming those values, and the swagger level is a little out of control for me at times.
Dude, you got some
uh,
swagger, bro. I've seen some video. I love it. I love it
it,
though.
it's to me, it's necessary for what I do. And so it is one of those things that I've had people ask me, how do I describe myself? And the words that I use all the time I'm charmingly irreverent. I'm going to smile and tell you I don't give a shit. But that's just the truth, because I have a path. I know my path. I know what I need to do to get there. And so I am just doing what that is with deliberate intention. I'm speaking those things, those values into every appointment, into every interview, into everything that I do, because I know that if I honor these things, then my chance of influencing the outcome that I want is the best it's going to get. I know that I can't control the outcome, but I'm going to do everything in my power to influence that. And that comes from these decisions that I'm making in every discussion and every interaction and every appointment that I have.
Mm. Brant, dude, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been amazing.
My pleasure, brother. Thank you so much for having me.